Hello everyone, in this video I'm going to be discussing the new super resolution tool available in Adobe Camera Raw in Photoshop. It's not currently available in Lightroom, although hopefully it will be soon, at which point it will be even more useful. And it's essentially an artificial intelligence boosted method for increasing the apparent resolution and detail present in your images. And it's actually not the first time we've seen this kind of technology before. There was Topaz Labs Gigapixel AI, which you can still buy, and I had on trial a while ago, but I wasn't really happy with the artifacts I was seeing, so ultimately I didn't purchase that program. Whereas this is free to anybody who's already subscribed to the photography plan or the full Creative Cloud with Adobe, so it's well worth checking out. But before I get into the details of the tool and exactly what it does, I thought I'd mention that a lot of the videos I've been producing have been geared towards beginners and intermediates, or understanding how these editing tools work. Whereas this really is going to be targeted just at people who are making very large prints or enlarging old files to much greater than their original sizes. So it's really got a very limited use for you if you've got, say, a 20 megapixel plus camera and you're printing at smaller than 24 inches. You're really not going to see too much difference. But if you're interested, we can have a look at this tool and see exactly what it does. So let's get started. The first thing you'll want to do is open a RAW file in Photoshop, and that should automatically load the Adobe Camera Raw converter, and it will also load your Lightroom edits depending on how you've got Lightroom set up, but it should do that, and that's what you see here. And then if I right click on this file and I select Enhance, it will load up a dialog box. And you can see we just have this simple checkbox here for super resolution. There is no more control than that, which is a good thing because it's nice and simple and seems to do a pretty good job off the bat. Although, of course, if you would prefer more control, then you'll need to use a different program such as that Gigapixel AI. The one thing I would say about this is it's very graphics card intensive. I've actually just sent my graphics card in for replacement, but before I did, I tried this feature and I was getting completion times of 5 seconds. So that's with a modern graphics card. But this is a 2015 MacBook Pro, and it actually takes in excess of 8 minutes when I've timed it. So I'm not going to make you sit through that, but it will just load an additional RAW file into this Adobe Camera Raw converter film strip here, and you can edit it like any other RAW file, but it is twice the dimension in both X and Y dimensions, so it's 4 times the size with much higher apparent resolution, and then you can go ahead and edit as you would normally. But I'm going to click cancel, and we're going to have a look at this in Photoshop. So here is the super resolution file open in Photoshop. This is a 150 megapixel image, having started at just below 40 megapixels. So it's exactly 4 times the resolution of that cropped file that I started with. And I've actually renamed this layer here Super Res so you can see what you're looking at. And then I've also gone ahead and created an upsized version of the same file, but using traditional methods. So using Photoshop's upsizing algorithm, the preserve details in this case, which is the same as if you would left the upsizing on auto. And that preserve details method is itself essentially the so-called staircase method, where you would upsize 10% at a time to preserve edge fidelity. So this is basically the best upsizing method we have available to us in Photoshop, and we're going to compare the two and see just what a good job this super resolution tool does. So let's use the navigator here to zoom in, and we're going to go all the way to 200 or so percent, and we're going to click on this sheepfold here. So this is actually where farmers used to drive in their sheep overnight so that they didn't wander off. Not used anymore, of course, but if we turn off this preserve details layer here, then you'll see the resolution apparently improve very significantly. So there's a combination of sharpening existing edges and actually introducing some detail too. Not all of it good, but I'll just go back and forth a couple of times here so you can see what's going on. And then I'm going to point out a couple of specific things. So if I just move up to this tree here, this is a good example of an artifact. And this is the kind of thing that I would see in gigapixel AI, although I seem to remember it actually being worse than that. And if I turn this preserve details, the traditional method, back on again, you can see this really weird pattern. And in fact, let's just zoom in even more on that so we can really see it. So it's really quite a strange little artifact that you can see there's almost a pattern to it as well, like it's in a cross shape of pixels. It's slightly odd, and you can see that really isn't there at all in that original file. So there's actually artifacts like this that appear all over the image in different ways, and they may or may not be noticeable, and whether they become a problem will depend largely on what size you print the file. So if we look down at this area here, this little patch of grass, then you can see a slightly weird snaking pattern emerging there. But if I zoom back out to a slightly more reasonable zoom level again, so again we'll go back to about 200%, you can see that broadly the improvement in apparent detail in the image is nothing short of miraculous, because here's where we started and here's all that detail that seems to have been found out of nowhere. And I have to say, most people would never notice even the worst artifacts that I've managed to find scrolling around these images. Whether that bothers you, of course, is up to you. It probably would bother me, so I would spend a lot of time looking for those little patches of artifacts. But as I look around this scene here, I can't really see anything that leaps out at me as being problematic. So it probably is the case that there's just a few very specific areas. You can maybe see a couple of spots here and here where we start to see these slightly ugly artifacts appearing. I'm going to take you onto another image now, again, that I've done exactly the same approach with. So you can see we've got this traditionally upsized layer on top and the super resolution layer below. And I'm going to zoom into 200% here. And so this is the traditionally upsized method using that staircase or preserve details method. And this is the super resolution file. So you can see just how beautifully crisp these twigs on this birch tree have become. It really is quite a dramatic improvement. So that's the before and that's the after, and you can imagine how, if you were printing this the size of a wall, this additional detail on a file like this could really help the image to look at its very best. Of course, I am starting with a 50 megapixel file, so I really have to print quite enormous to see this kind of difference. I'd certainly be perfectly happy printing up to about 40 inches with a sharp 50 megapixel file without using this super resolution, although you would see a slight improvement with the super resolution if you did use it at that size. But here's another problem area. So if we turn on the preserve details layer, the traditional layer, then you can see this slightly out of focus area in the background looks really quite smooth in comparison to the preserve details where it's the super resolution version, where it's introduced what can only be described really as artifacts, because that texture there shouldn't be there. It should be out of focus, and it seems to have sharpened the texture and added bits of detail that weren't there originally. So there are ways you could deal with that. Of course, I did have a play around with creating edge masks, which you need to know what you're doing to create those. But it was very difficult actually to totally protect this area using a sort of automated action type method. And I think whatever method you chose for protecting these areas, you'd probably have to go in and manually check that everything was working at its best. So that's another problem area. You can also see, if you really zoom in, some slightly weird color differences. So if we look at the moss here, the lichen on the tree, then if you just look at the color of the pixels in this lichen, then you can see that the super resolution version introduces a lot of color noise or color detail. So it's clearly not just adding luminance detail, it's also adding color detail. So there's a few really weirdly colored pixels. So let's zoom into a really crazy level again so we can actually focus on a specific pixel that I've spotted, if I can find it again. I mean, let's just look at this general area here. and turn on that preserve details again, you can see it just creates a lot of additional color detail, if you want to call it that, but really it's color artifacts because that color was not there in the original file. So fortunately there is a very easy way to deal with that, and that would be to have both of these layers open. So create this traditionally upsized layer for the color information, and then use the super resolution just for the luminance information. So if I put this super resolution layer on top and then change the blend mode to luminosity, then what that will do is ensure that the super resolution layer is only creating the detail, if you like. It's not creating color detail. So now you can see there is no color shift when I turn that on and off, and that's far preferable to me. So I think if ever I use this super resolution feature, I will be using it in this way, using it as a luminosity blend layer so that it enhances the detail but doesn't affect the colors. And I'm sorry if you're a beginner or intermediate, because all of this may have just gone completely over your head, and it's not really intended for you in many ways, because this is the kind of thing that you would be doing if you wanted to produce a gigantic print, and it absolutely shouldn't be part of your standard workflow. Of course, if you do have some very old images, I have some images that I still quite like taken on a Canon 20D, which is an 8 megapixel camera, then maybe I'll have a play with this software and see if it can do a good job of upsizing some of those images. But a really, really interesting tool. Just be aware of some of the artifacts that exist, both in terms of pattern and in terms of color, and develop some potential ways to work around those problems. But it does have limited application, but I have to say I'm very impressed. Most of the textures it produces look very good to my eyes, and I think at any sort of large print size rather than truly vast print size, that additional detail and sharpness will only improve the appearance of the print. So really interesting tool. So I hope you've enjoyed that video, and please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. This channel is growing, and it's growing faster, which is really encouraging. So thank you for those of you who have subscribed, but if you want to see more of this content, please do click that button.